Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Joe Theodore, and it's an honor to be here with you today. Today is a very, very special video, and I really hope you can stick around and watch the entire video because this video is intense, guys, and also beautiful and lovely and extremely informative. And I felt like I needed to make this from now, and I'm planning on doing multiple videos on this topic, including the Mercury and Venus retrogrades happening in 2025, because they all tie in together. And this couldn't be a better time as well to be releasing my retrograde series classes, because I don't think anyone really understands how important the retrograde stories are going to be, pretty much starting in October all the way through May, close to June 2025. And as of today, when you're seeing this, I have just released my Mars retrograde class. So all of my retrograde classes, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, are now available on my teaching portal. The classes are very affordable. You click the links down below. It goes to a special Patreon teaching portal, which you do not need to be a member of Patreon to go purchase classes. And I'm really building up a library of education there. So please go check that out. But if not now, we all know what retrogrades are. Like, we all have a sense, right? But there is a ancient science and philosophy behind them. There is a deeper significance of what retrogrades are. And in my classes, I talk about what would happen if you were born with one of these retrograde planets. And I'm not to the major big planets yet. I'm not to Saturn, Jupiter, through Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but I'm getting there slowly. But retrogrades are massive karmic points in all of our soul contracts in our lives, whether we have one in the birth chart or whether we are experiencing one in the here and now time-space reality, which throughout our entire lifespan, we have retrogrades. You know, Mercury happens twice a year. We have a Venus retrograde every 16 to 18 months. And then Mars retrogrades happen almost every 24 months, a little bit more than that, almost more, 2 years and a month or so. That's how rare Mars retrogrades are. So we're having a Mars retrograde coming in the fall, 2024. That Mars retrograde will last until mid-February, but the integration phase, where it gets back to its original point, where it went to, when it was originally, before it went retrograde, will be in like sometime in March, right? Like the middle to end of March. And I'm going to go really quick through all these dates because I'm going to be making so much content on the retrogrades. You know, as this year moves forward, you know, I might get a little too excited and make videos here and there, kind of way too far in advance, like this one, for example. But I'm also making these even the retrograde video I made, I think a week or two ago, that was just a basic little overview of what retrogrades are, to kind of introduce the fact that I'm going to be making classes on these retrogrades. All those classes are about 90 minutes plus each. But I'm going to be retrograding it up here on the channel, you know, on and off consistently, because there is so much to come. We are going to be facing historic changes in the world. These retrogrades, of course, like any retrograde, is a major part of our lives and the collective story. But we have so much going on moving into 2025, 2026, 2027, and the rest of the 2020s, to be honest. And then Pluto and Aquarius will be changing the world forever. And Neptune will be going into Aries next spring, which will be in the middle of the thick of the integration phase with Mars. But Venus and Mercury will be both retrograde together. And Venus doesn't go retrograde often. And Mercury this will be the second retrograde cycle. Mercury will be retrograde twice during the Mars retrograde energies as well. So Mercury will be going retrograde in the fall when Mars is retrograde-ish in that area, when it's retrograde. or right before it goes retrograde. I'll show you the dates in a minute. But then in the spring, while Mars is going through its integration phase and while Neptune is entering Aries, Mercury will be going retrograde with Venus. Neptune going into Aries is one of the most profound astrological predictions and moments that we've been anticipating for years, along because Pluto is going into Aquarius for its 20-year cycle. Yes, Neptune will retrograde back into Pisces for a little bit and then go into Aries officially for a very long time, starting in like 2026. But 2025 is when this all kicks off, when we really see where the world is going, when we really see some insane transformations with our own lives and stories and those parts of your birth chart. So I cannot stress this enough, how historic all of this is really going to be. Now, like I say in all my videos, we're not going to know the details, but we can know the forms. And I could tell you, when you look at the collective story, we can really start seeing some specifics and details. Now, for the sake of this video, and to not ramble on, because I can literally talk forever on this, and I probably will make a class strictly on the Mars, Venus, and Mercury retrograde. Like, I'll probably make, not a master class, but a very lengthy class going through all of my feelings on this time in our life, the historicness of all of this, what I think may or may not happen, clairvoyantly and whatnot. But let's just get back to Mars real quick, and then I'm going to run through all of these dates just to show you and to just how insane this is going to be. Moving from the fall of 2024 through the spring of 2025. And then at the end of this video, I'm actually going to share with you the first 15 minutes of the Mars retrograde class. So you can kind of get a glimpse of the beginning part of the class itself. And maybe if you watch the first 15 minutes of the class, you can go purchase the class and go watch the rest of it, But I want to share that actual official, I want to share you an exact clip from the beginning of the class, so you can kind of get a sense of my teaching style and how I lean into a class, generally speaking. But guys, this Mars retrograde, again, I'm going to do more videos on this, of course, but this is the beginning of this Mars story from my perspective, and because the world looks to America in many ways for things, this is all about the election. This is all about the election. This is all about the state of America. Pluto will be back in Capricorn, and this will be the Pluto return of the United States once again, which is a defining moment in American history, the foundation of America. There are so many significations around that Pluto return, but this Mars retrograde will be happening starting December 7th. So that is going to be the actual moment it goes retrograde, but there will be a pre-shadow for Mars that goes back 2 to 3 weeks before that. So when the election in America is happening, the couple of weeks after the election, we will be in the official Mars retrograde shadow, the pre-shadow, before it goes retrograde. That's what we call it, the pre-shadow. Then it goes retrograde December 7th, and then it will go direct on February 24th. But there is so much that goes on in between that, guys. And like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm not going to go into super detail talking about this Mars retrograde. I'm not going to talk about the Venus and the Mercury retrograde happening later down the line. But I want to, because I'm going to make all videos and talks on that very specifically, and probably a class on all of this. But let me just run down exactly what's going on in the next year and a half, right? Starting with this Mars retrograde. So Mars enters Leo on November 4th, because the Mars retrograde will be happening starting at 6 degrees Leo, and then it will happen a lot in Cancer, and then it will retrograde back into Leo. So this is a Leo Mars retrograde, okay? So Mars enters Leo November 4th. And what's November 2nd, guys? November 2nd is the United States election. And Pluto will be in Capricorn still, heading its way back into Aquarius, which is a defining moment, by the way. That's a whole other story. So this Mars story starts November 4th, 2 days after the election. Then we have a Mercury retrograde, the first Mercury retrograde of 2 within this Mars cycle story, okay? Mercury stations retrograde November 26th, which means there's going to be a pre-shadow in the same time that there's a pre-shadow for Mars. So they will be pre-shadowing together. But Mercury retrograde, in my opinion, this will have a lot to do with votes being screwed up. We're going to have the same deja vu moment, most likely, from 2020. There's going to be a lot of issues around votes and the election and, again, retrograding Mars, communication, contracts, stuff like that. So this is very, very auspicious. So that happens November 26th. We have the Mercury official retrograde. That pre-shadow will be happening pretty much, like, oh my God, it's just insane to even think about these things, guys. Astrology is so real. It's so incredibly real. So Mercury's pre-shadow will happen right after the election, right? Right as Mars is preparing to go in its pre-shadow, or when Mars goes pre-shadow. Then Mars stations retrograde December 7th, okay? Then Mars re-enters Cancer January 6th. Do we all remember what happened on January 6th? Yep. So Mars will re-enter Cancer and get back to 29 degrees Cancer on January 6th. The last time Mars was there in 2024 was November 3rd. So it will be going back to November 3rd. When was the election? November 2nd. So Mars re-enters Cancer on the exact same day where just before, in the previous couple of months, it was a day after the election. This Mars retrograde story is all about American politics from a collective perspective. Now, what goes on in our lives is a whole different story. Now, let me cruise through this, guys, because I know I'm already talking way too much. So then Mars will station direct February 24th at 17 degrees. Okay, 17 degrees Cancer. The last time it was there was October 6th, so that might be a significant date. Now, looking ahead, Venus stations retrograde March 2nd. Then Venus and Mercury, sorry, I had a brain fart. I'm reading my notes here. Then Venus and Mercury form a conjunction March 11th. So Venus will be retrograde, Mercury will be going direct in Aries, and Mercury will conjunct a Venus that is already going retrograde. Then, March 15th, a couple of days later, Mercury stations retrograde in Aries and will come back to Venus, and they will be conjunct, guys. Listen to this. Mercury and Venus will be in retrograde conjunct all the way until around April 13th, until they go direct again. And during this time, Neptune will ingress into Aries while both Mercury and Venus are retrograde. And Mercury and Venus, while they're retrograde, back into Pisces, right? Because they were in Aries, then they're going to go back into Pisces. And they will be conjunct with Saturn the entire time that both of them are in Pisces again. Then, by April 13th, Mercury and Venus will be direct, and they'll be moving back towards Aries. And May 3rd, Mars which has already been going direct for some time, right? Since February, right? So the integration phase for Mars lasts until it gets to the exact point that it went direct or retrograde originally. So it originally went retrograde at 6 degrees Leo. The next time it gets back to 6 degrees Leo is May 3rd. And that's when the Mars retrograde story is completely over. So how long are we talking about here? We are discussing global shifts. We are talking about political shifts. We are talking about a new world in regarding American politics and the way that we maybe even, again, this can have a lot to do with further segregation in America and just who knows the details, guys. Remember, the form is here, though. This is the form that I'm talking about. But what are the details? How is this really going to manifest? We don't know. But all I'm telling you is if you tracked with all those dates that I supplied you, and rewatch this again if you need to, this is an insane American tale. And that is just probably one of many tales with all of this, because of course around the world we experience this in all different collective ways. But we have to get real. The world looks to America as the greatest superpower. We might slowly be losing that position based on many different things, but this is a defining moment for the world. Anything that goes on in American politics or in America generally speaking is a defining moment for the world, whether for the positive or the negative. So guys, I will be talking about all of this so much deeper. I will be making probably a class or two, depending on how I want to go about breaking this stuff down, because this is some historic, crazy astrology. And this alone, like these teachings and this stuff that I share, this can prove astrology is real to people who are skeptical. Like there's no way around it. There is way too much truth and symbolism in all of this. And it's just incredible. So guys, that's all I have for this part of the video. But what I want to do is share with you the beginning of my Mars retrograde class. So you can kind of get a feel of what my classes start like, especially with these retrograde classes. So please, once again, I do have all the links down below. Please click around, go explore. Even if you don't want to buy anything, just go click them anyway and go check out what I'm saying. Just go explore and see, with your own eyes, like the presentation of these this portal that I have. You do not need to be a Patreon member in order to purchase classes. But again, you can learn about the Patreon while you're there clicking around. But again, I have Mercury, Venus, and now Mars retrograde classes all up and running. And you will learn everything you need to know about retrograde cycles and the planets themselves. What do these planets do when they're retrograde? The significance, the meanings. I go through every single house topic with the potential of what would happen if those retrograde planets were in what particular part of your birth chart. So I go through house 1 all the way through 12. And also, if you have any natal placements with these planets, I go into detail explaining what that can mean for you, as far as like a soul contract karmic lesson. So anyway, guys, I know this video was a lengthy one, but it was very important for me to make. I do hope you resonated with this. Again, stay tuned for more content regarding this historic stuff. There are more historic things happening in the astrology, as we move forward in time. So much more. And I'm just super grateful that you guys are here on this journey with me as I teach all of these things. So next up is the beginning clip from my Mars retrograde class. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mars retrograde class. This is the third class of my series that I'm recording in order. I'm going through all of the personal planets, all the way up through Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And of course, I wanted to go in order because, one, the solar system, and two, the personal planets are really, really the most important when it comes to our everyday lived experience. Venus, Mercury, and Mars constantly are present in our life. Where Saturn, yes, all the planets have their place in our life. We can sense where they are. We know what they're doing. But when it comes to Venus, Mercury, and Mars, that's like a daily basis. Okay, what is it doing today specifically? They're very specific energies and events and triggers. And that's something actually we're going to talk about with Mars. Speaking of the word trigger, speaking of the word sharp, because Mars is one of those planets that doesn't mess around. Mars can get us into trouble. Mars can hurt us physically, and then of course emotionally, spiritually. But Mars is really has a lot to do with physicality, our movement. And yes, that can be also translated to thought, the way we think. Because thought arises through Mercury. And, we could say every planet has some thought, in there, but Mercury is the planet of thought, the planet of the intellect. And then that has to be translated through the emotional system, which is where we can maybe say Venus has a role to play. The moon, of course. And then Mars is where we take action. Mars is where we go out into the world to claim what's ours, or to defend oneself, or to defend someone else, to create. Venus, in my Venus retrograde video, I talked a lot about receptivity, how Venus is more of I don't want to say taker, but Venus is about coming to us, money coming to us, pleasure coming to us. We really feel Venus as it approaches into our being, and we enjoy that feeling. We enjoy when we're experiencing something and it enters our body, right? Artwork, we see artwork and it comes into us. Where Mars is, I'm going to paint that idea I have. I'm going to go do this because that's how I'm going to get this money. Or I'm in love with you, so this is what I'm going to do to constantly make our love work. I'm going to make the plans for dinner. Where Venus would be like waiting for what are the plans for dinner? I'm waiting. Venus is more like, what are the plans for dinner? I'm waiting. Where Mars is like, okay, I know exactly where we're going. Let's go. Get in the car. So this is the third class in my retrograde series. I'm going to go after Mars. This is the third class. So if you're watching this, and I already have all of them up and ready, because listen, I can't tell the future, but in the future, when you see all my classes, there's probably so many. If you're watching this in the future, I'm recording this in the June of 2024. If you're watching this in the future, then I probably have a ton of other classes up and running. And maybe all the retrograde classes are already up too. But this is the third class I'm recording, and I'm very excited to continue on this series because this is such an important topic. This is such an important discussion in astrology, because some of us are born with Mars retrogrades. When we're all born with a Mars. But some of us are born with Mars retrogrades, which is very rare. And I'm going to go into a bunch of stuff that I wrote down as we move forward in the class, because a lot of the things I wrote down, I want to just flat out read to you. Because I'm I love writing, and it's so easy for me to get my thoughts out more when I write. And I mentioned how rare it is. It's like almost every 2 years, we have one retrograde Mars. So almost every 2 years. And the next one, as I record this video, will be happening December 2024. Into February, almost March 2025. And when we consider the pre-shadow phase and the post-shadow integration phase of any retrograde cycle, but especially Mars, because it is the longest gap of time that goes by before it goes retrograde again, which is why they're very auspicious and rare. We're dealing with almost 3 months or more of a retrograde. And whatever house sign it's occupying, it floats around and stays within a sign for much longer than it normally would. Which is also very significant, because where these retrogrades fall in your life can really give you a super, super clear picture of what your life karmic lesson is for a Mars retrograde. And I'll talk about birth chart placements, and at the end of the class, I'm going to go through all of the houses. And you can take, you know, whether you want to assume that this is like a trip around the zodiac and the houses for your birth chart purposes, or for maybe the next time it's going to go retrograde, like in the here and now time space reality. Because then you can already sort of maybe gauge what might happen to you. So this is the third class. The third most important personal planet for our everyday experience. A planet we must understand fully, because a lot of us have our Mars suppressed. A lot of us don't fully activate our Mars. Mars can also bring up anger. And we're going to talk a lot about Mars, guys, but before I really get this class started, we need to talk about what a retrograde actually is. And in every one of these classes, I have to go through this because I don't know who has bought other classes already. This might be the one class you buy for whatever reason. Maybe you've never seen any of my other classes yet. So I can't assume that everyone has seen my introduction, so to speak, where I talk about what a retrograde is, exactly its meaning, the significations behind an actual retrograde cycle. Because if we don't lay down that fundamental aspect to all of this, then I'll just be talking about Mars the whole time. And we won't really understand what the retrograde actually has to do with the planet itself. Because retrogrades actually make the planet weak. And it really does this weird time travel-y thing sometimes, where it brings us back in time. And retrogrades are karmic destiny points in which stopping, reviewing, and resting, and dealing with whatever repercussions or events or moments that arise is extremely important. It's extremely important for our growth. So what is a retrograde? A retrograde is literally the term as defined as to go backwards. In the sky, when Mars goes retrograde, it appears to be going backwards. Any planet that is in retrograde appears as if it is going backwards in the sky, and when you observe it. Now, it really isn't moving backwards. It's an illusion. And it just has something to do with the ecliptics and, just the way the Earth moves and whatever else is going on up there. But it's an illusion based upon the movement of the Earth and the planetary placements of other planets, right? Depending on what other planets are doing. It'll make an impression or an appearance as if it's going backwards. And for Mars to go retrograde, this is a very rare thing. Because again, the outer planets are retrograde almost most of the year. Saturn and Jupiter go retrograde, I think about once a year, or twice a year, once a year, but they're very long retrogrades, very long retrograde cycles. Mercury goes retrograde twice a year, maybe sometimes 3. Venus only goes retrograde once every 18 months, 16 to 18 months. And Mars, we're dealing with almost 2 years. Every 2 years we have a Mars retrograde. So Mars is the longest amount of time before it goes retrograde. Like I said in the beginning of this class. Which makes this a very important karmic lesson. Now, depending on when you're seeing this, I already know when the 2024-2025 Mars retrograde, I already know what the story is for that on a collective level. And of course we each will have our own story. And of course, the world and all other nations and people and societies and whatever and whoever has a birth chart, there will be a Mars retrograde that affects it. And in America, the Mars retrograde is going to happen right during that period after the election and after the inauguration. So that entire winter, we're going to be in a Mars retrograde. Right? So I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just letting you know. You can already see a very Martian energy being stopped in its tracks, and something very, very massive in my country is about to take place with 2 political figures that are, this is one of the most crazy elections in modern times. And oh yeah, a Mars retrograde is going to happen the first week in December. And the pre-shadow will be happening for 2 weeks before that. When they'll be starting to count, when they'll be counting votes, they'll be in the thick of it, right? And honestly, we should know who the president is by the second week, right after the election, sort of, right? But no, I don't think so. I don't think this one is going to be any different from the last one. And then we're dealing with a Mars retrograde. So guys, I'm just kind of, it's in my consciousness right now because that is how profound astrology is. And I could already sense like, holy shit, there's a Mars retrograde coming. But in the plainest of terms, guys, retrogrades bring things back from the past, or they make us stop where we can't move forward anymore, right? So to go backwards, to be stopped in our tracks, to be delayed, to go into a review process. And when we're dealing with Mars being stopped in its tracks, when we're dealing with Mars being in a place of rest and review, or maybe something from your past comes back to you that's potentially very Martian, and you must figure out a way to activate that Mars energy in order to, handle that thing from your past. Because Mars, retrogrades can bring things from the past into the present. Yes. Most of the time, it's usually a delay, a block, a realization, a rest and review. And because we're dealing with Mars, a suppression of anger, our Martian tendencies can be closed off, blocked. So that's really where I think Mars retrogrades are. It's this feeling of internal not being able to express whatever planet, is being retrograde or is in retrograde. Retrogrades are also a very internal experience, especially when you're born if you're born with them. Retrogrades in the birth chart are very, they're disabled. That's the word I use a lot. for retrogrades in the birth chart. And I'm not saying that in a triggering way. I'm just saying when a planet is retrograde in a birth chart, it is like having a disabled planet, which means throughout your life, you need therapy, you need extra care, you need extra help, you need advisory, you need therapies, you need whatever the case may be. And when we're dealing with Mars, we could be dealing with anger suppression, we could be dealing with, physical disabilities, literally, not to bring up the word disability again, but we could be dealing with physical disabilities. We could be dealing with shyness, not being, able to really take action in our life and not feeling confident in ourselves, not being someone who's self-assertive. So there's this internal feeling to it where we just can't express the true nature of the planet. But during a retrograde cycle, in the here and now time-space reality that we all experience, there will be this suppression, there will be this block, there will be this rest and review, there will be this challenge where we can't move forward. Because Mars wants to move forward, take action, work, do the damn thing. It wants to, get what it wants. So retrogrades mean all of that stuff. This going within, this going backwards, this stopping. From going direct, we're now stopping and slowly going backwards, right? Things could get worse before they get better. Realizations can be had before we can move forward again.